Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending upon where you are in the world, and welcome to today's webinar, Walk Before You Run, the Easy Way to Move to SAP S4HANA, hosted by SAP Insider and sponsored by Lumity. My name is Steve Paul. I'm your moderator today. We have just a few announcements before we begin. This webinar is designed to be interactive between you and our presenter. Later in the program, we'll ask for your feedback. This webinar also contains audience polling, so please complete the polls when they appear. You can participate in our Q&A session by asking questions about the information presented in this webinar at any time. Just type your question into the text box located at the bottom left of the console and click the Submit Question button. We'll answer as many questions as time permits after the presentation. Slides will advance automatically throughout the event, and you can download a PDF copy of our presentation by clicking on the Download Slide link in the resource box on the bottom left of our console. And at this time, we recommend you disable your pop-up blockers. If you're experiencing any technical problems, please visit our webinar help guide by clicking on the Help icon in the bottom right of our console. And if slides are not advancing, please press the F5 key on your keyboard to refresh your browser. Now on to our presentation, Walk Before You Run, the Easy Way to Move to SAP S4HANA. Discussing today's topic will be Lorraine Howell, Vice President, Research and Development at Lumity. Over to you, Lorraine.
Thank you, Steve. Hi, everyone. Welcome to the webinar today. I hope that we will be able to answer some questions that you might have. But let's get started and see if we can get into some of the details. Firstly, I did want to highlight the fact that this is a two-part webinar series. Today, we're looking at how you can get to SAP S4HANA in the easiest possible way. And then later on this year, we will have a second webinar where we will talk about some of the real business benefits of moving to SAP S4HANA. And one of the areas that I'll be focusing on are the embedded analytics. And we'll probably refer to that a bit as we go along today, but it is something that I would like to focus on in a future webinar. So I look forward to hosting you all in that webinar as well. But let's get to the topic today. So it's Walk Before You Run, the easy way to move to SAP S4HANA. I think a lot of you on the call are probably thinking, is that really even possible? Can we move easily to SAP S4HANA? And the answer to that is not straightforward. It's not necessarily just, yes, it's easy. It will all depend on a lot of circumstances, specifically your situation, your system, the customizations you may have done in your system, and where you want to go and be with SAP S4HANA over the next little while. The other topic I think that's the other thing that's on everybody's mind is the 2025 deadline, where SAP is saying, we want all of our customers to have moved or made this move. And the question then is, well, I've got 7 years. That's actually still quite some time. I can think about it and plan it and do it in the time that I have. There's two things I want you to think about as we go through this. One is that enough time? And can I really get planned to do this? And secondly, is there something about S4HANA I'd probably want to embrace earlier than those 7 years? So before 2025, is there stuff that's coming out in S4HANA that maybe is luring me right now that I would like to embrace? So just something to think about as we go through this talk today. I've kind of divided the agenda into some topics. So the first topic I wanted to talk about was, what can everyone that's on the call do today? So whether you've decided you are moving to SAP S4HANA now or later, or you haven't decided at all, this readiness check that we'll talk about very briefly is something everybody can do right now. And you'll find that it requires interpretation, so we'll talk a little bit about what you would need to do once you run it. But that is something you can start, and you can run it multiple times. It's not something you run once and then that's it, you can't run it again. You can run this readiness check at any time during your process of choosing the way to go. The next step then is once you've kind of had a feel for the readiness of your environment and of yourselves for moving forward, what is the adoption path that you're going to choose? And there are a number of options that SAP has laid on the table that most of you probably have seen by now. But we'll talk a little bit about each of those paths, and then also talk about the complexities and disruptions that you might face based on the path that you chose. And then we're going to talk a bit about moving to SAP S4HANA in a gradual way. And the question is that even possible? Like I kind of implied at the beginning, that is a good question. And things we'll consider in doing that is the change management your organization has to go through, as well as data concerns, because some of us have a lot more data, some of us have a lot more messy data than others. How do we handle all of that as we move forward? And then I'm going to very briefly go over some lessons learned that we've learned as an organization, Illumity, doing some of these migrations. And hopefully, in imparting that, it kind of will help prepare you as you start thinking about your path forward. And then we'll summarize and go into a Q&A at the end, just so that I can answer any questions that might arise during this conversation. All right, so let's go to the readiness check. So clearly, when you're thinking about moving to SAP S4HANA, there's going to be a lot of questions, and the questions that the readiness check actually answers are amongst the following. Firstly, how much of SAP HANA do I need? And that's really looking at it at multiple levels. It's looking at the actual system sizing based on the size of the database that you have and the customizations that you've done. But it's also looking at how much do I want to embrace out of SAP HANA as I go forward. The next question is, are my add-ons, so anything that I've added on to SAP ECC or even SAP R3 in the past, how many of those add-ons are actually going to be compatible? And if you've been studying the simplification that SAP has published with each upgrade, you'll find that there are some add-ons that are no longer compatible. And SAP actually has instructions on what you need to do in the case that you find something is not compatible. But it would be good to know up front what these are. What SAP Fiori apps are available. Now, if you go to the SAP library, you're going to see there's over 10,000 Fiori applications disclosed in that library. A lot of those applications are just GUI transactions that have been transformed to match a Fiori theme. A small fraction of those, probably 10 to 15% of them, are actually new applications that SAP has built to go along with the SAP S4HANA implementation. Now, those are the apps that you need to be aware of, and those are the apps that this readiness check is going to advise you on using. So it's basically going to look at your system and say, based on your most used transactions today, these are the SAP Fiori apps that are going to be best used in your business going forward. In addition to that, what business functions are affected. So if you're looking at your business processes that you run today, which of those are being simplified by SAP, and how is that going to affect the way you run your business today? And then of all these simplification items outside of the business processes, but just generally across master data and everything else, which are actually relevant to your implementation. Now you have to understand that this readiness check is run on your system, so it's going to look at what functionalities you are using within your system, what has been switched on, what modules you're using, what are the transactions that you're running, and then compare that with the simplification list and break it up into categories that you can then analyze in more detail. So it's very detailed, actually. And then finally, looking at your custom code, everybody's afraid of the custom code implications. I know that, I don't know any customers actually of ours that haven't at least done some custom code during their lifetime as SAP customers. And the question is, will this all work in the new SAP S4HANA environment? As we know, data structures have changed, and there might be an impact on custom code based on these data structure changes. So all of this is stuff, information that you would expect to get out of the readiness check. So you're running this, as you can see on the left-hand side, you're actually running this in your SAP ECC system, either via Solution Manager, which is connected to your ECC system, or directly into your ECC system. I have made a little note at the bottom here that If you want more information on how you can run this, Illumity can definitely help you. You can also Google it and you'll find a lot of help online as well. Understanding the information that you get out of it, you can also see on the right-hand side, there are two formats that you would expect to see from the report. One is a graphical display that you can drill down into that gives you information on all of the items we just mentioned. But then there's also the ability to create a Word document from the results that gives you a more thorough Word output of all the findings. And from both of these, you can actually drill down and go into OSS notes and discover the implications of the readiness check that way. So this is really where everybody should start. If you haven't done this today, it's probably worth going through this process. I'll just add that actually exploring and understanding the results may not be as easy as you think, because there is a lot of information. So it may be worthwhile engaging Illumity or one of your SIs to actually help you interpret the results, because there is a lot of information in it. But you can run this at any time, as I alluded to earlier on. All right, so I guess before I get on, I think we would like to run a poll just to figure out where you guys are in terms of your move. Steve, do you want to take this over at this point?
Absolutely. Thanks very much. Yeah, so we've got a couple of poll questions, and our first one here today, we'd like to know, what kind of move does your business want to make to SAP S4HANA? Please select any of these four choices here. Perhaps it's a technical move with a minimum impact to the business directly to SAP S4HANA. A technical move with minimum impact to the business, but in two steps. First to Suite on HANA, and then later to SAP S4HANA. Or perhaps a full-out conversion to SAP S4HANA, leveraging as much of its functionality, Fiori and analytics, etc., as possible. Another choice may be that you have no plans to move to SAP S4HANA as yet. So please share your responses with your colleagues, and we'll show the results in a moment. I want to just remind everybody that we will be taking audience questions at the conclusion of the presentation. We have a couple already, so thank you, and please submit more at any time. Let's see, Lorraine, are you interested in seeing the results?
I'm absolutely interested in. Let me go to the next slide and have a look.
Great. Well. Okay,
so this is kind of the result I would have hoped for, Steve, because I'm kind of hoping that people are seeing real value in S4HANA and would like to make that leap directly into the S4HANA environment, but also to leverage as much of the functionality as possible. And 37% is a good percentage. I mean, it would be great if everybody saw the value and had the appetite to go all out. But I also understand that there are a bunch of us that are thinking, well, let's just get to S4HANA, do that technical upgrade, and then we'll figure out afterwards how we embrace the new stuff. And in fact, the conversation today, the discussion that I'm going through today, is a little bit more focused towards that group of people. But it can also affect the people that want to embrace all of the new processes as well. And then I see that there are still a bunch of people that haven't yet made plans and still think that 7 years is enough time to think about it, which may indeed be the case in your situation. So this is a good result and really does stage us for the next part of the discussion. All right, so moving on, just quickly to outline the different paths, and by now I'm sure SAP has drummed this down your throat, so you probably do already understand all of these options. But let's just quickly go through them, and we'll talk about the disruption that each of these may cause within the business. So firstly is doing a greenfield or new implementation. So this is really saying, I've looked at my current environment. I'm not that happy with the situation of that environment, but I need to move to S4. And SAP has also evolved all of its best practices since we implemented years ago. We want to embrace all of that. So we want to move forward into a brand new implementation. So this is really looking at a re-implementation. The other option would be a system conversion. So this would be saying, you know what, we've gone through that effort of implementing SAP, ECC, or even R3. We kind of like where we got to. We're happy with our business processes. Yes, there's lots of digital transformation we want to make, and we want to move forward to S4, but we want to also leverage what we've done so far and carry that with us. So the system conversion would make that a possibility for you, just converting what you have today. And then there may be some of us that have a very diverse landscape of SAP solutions all across the globe, plus maybe even other ERP solutions across the globe, and we've finally decided that we love SAP S4HANA and what it has to offer, and we want a global instance. And in order to get there, we are either going to implement S4HANA and migrate all of these disparate systems into that system, or merge them into that system, or we're going to create a central finance environment just to centralize all of our finance in S4HANA, having a integration between that system and all of our other systems, and then move that system eventually into our global solution for the entire company. So there's a bunch of different options here that you can have. And if we're looking at some terminology that we see in the market, a greenfield is really that new implementation. Brownfield is really the system conversion. And I haven't put a tag on landscape transformation. Some people call it a colorful conversion, and there are other names for it. But for the moment, we're going to focus more on the greenfield and brownfield options. All right, so if we're looking at greenfield, what are the guidelines for people choosing greenfield? I already mentioned that you might have a very complex landscape, very old solutions, very old systems of R3, even ECC maybe that you haven't done many upgrades on, and you really don't want any of the current content of that system to burden this new landscape or this new vision that you have for your company. So that would be the greenfield kind of implementation. On the brownfield side, this is where, like I said, you've got a pretty good, and I put it in quotation marks, SAP ERP system. Good is relevant to your understanding of what that might be, but good enough that you want to keep and just start leveraging the new S4HANA stuff on top of that. And this is the solution that will also enable you, if you're on-premise today, to stay in an on-prem environment, or if you're in cloud, stay in the cloud, but it won't give you that opportunity to move to cloud if you are on-prem today. And we'll talk about that a little bit later as well. And then the landscape transformation is very similar to the greenfield, and we spoke about consolidating multiple systems and perhaps starting with just a central finance opportunity in S4HANA initially, which enables that integration into all of your legacy systems, and then building that solution out to be your final global solution for S4HANA going forward. Now, if we had to compare complexity and business disruption across each of these different options, complexity, I think the greenfield is fairly complex in a sense, because you're starting from a clean slate, so you're building it from scratch. But it's definitely less risky because you don't have all of that baggage to carry with you. And you have the flexibility of adopting best practices and things like that as well. You do have to be aware of data migration options that you would have to consider, because you're going to want to bring your data most likely across into this environment, and that's a whole conversation we can have perhaps in a subsequent webinar or in a call with us, but there are a lot of options to manage that. And then, of course, there's change management, because this is a new solution. And when you're going full-blown into a greenfield implementation, you're probably going to want to embrace all of the S4HANA analytics, Fiori applications, business processes, and so on. So there is that thing to consider. Brownfield probably is more complex in the sense that you have to manage the baggage that you're carrying. So you have to deal with the simplification, the add-on compatibility, all of that. And there is, of course, a fundamental difference in the architecture, the data structures behind the scenes in the S4HANA environment that you have to consider as well. So these are things that, when you're doing that brownfield, the SAP Readiness Check is going to help you prepare for how complex this is going to be for you. And then landscape transformation is very similar to the greenfield because you're starting up a brand new system. But the complexity will be a little bit around building those integrations to your legacy systems, assuming that you want that drill-down capability from your target system to the source systems. On the disruption to business side, there is quite a bit of disruption on the greenfield because it's a brand new implementation. So you have to consider that, and you have to have a pretty comprehensive good change management process in place to handle that. The brownfield, and we're going to spend a lot of time talking about that in the next half an hour, is really focusing on limited disruption actually to the business, limited system downtime, an opportunity to do a gradual transition. So let's just get that technical upgrade done and only roll out new capabilities as and when the different business units require that. And in that, but there is a reduced risk and effort in your move because you're using the system that you currently have. So that's all included into the brownfield environment. So probably the least disruptive to the business from that perspective. And then the transformation, of course, is if you decide to go the central finance and not a full-blown global implementation of your central system, the impact will be to finance initially, and then eventually to the rest of the business as you roll that out. So let's look at the two options, the greenfield and brownfield, in a little bit more detail just quickly, and then I'm going to focus more on brownfield after this. For greenfield, if you are going through that process, you probably want to start adopting SAP's Activate methodology, which really goes through these phases. SAP will provide expert-guided implementation help for you to actually go through this process as an existing SAP customer. You can get Learning Hub licenses, and I've got a link here to the Learning Hub that actually takes you into the elements of this process that you could then leverage to help you go through the greenfield implementation. So what I've highlighted in here is things like adopting best practices. So having a link to the best practices link, seeing what's included in all of these scenarios, and then when, of course, implementing these best practices in your greenfield systems so that out of the box you have those processes already working with data that you can do some of the discovery on. Also, there is a bunch of help around the SAP configuration process that you would need to go through to activate SAP Fiori in this greenfield implementation to leverage as many of the new applications that you can. And then also using putting a good data migration strategy in place, leveraging the new tools that SAP provides, like, for example, the migration cockpit versus using data services, which one to choose, and how you can leverage those tools to bring your data in from your legacy system. So all of that is really encapsulated in this expert-guided implementation help that you can get through the Learning Hub. Of course, a lot of this stuff is available outside of the Learning Hub as well, but this is one tool that will get you there. SAP also has a roadmap viewer, and I've got a link in here, so when you download the PDF, you should be able to get to that link as well, which I've now highlighted on the next slide, which really helps you with any of the roadmap paths that you choose. So whether you choose to go greenfield, brownfield, or through the colorful implementation path, you can actually choose that on the roadmap viewer. So I've highlighted here, you can look at what phase you want to focus on through the Activate methodology, and then you can also choose what path you're going, so whether it's the one of the three that I mentioned earlier. And then once you've made those choices, you will see on the right-hand side here, there's a whole list of links that will take you into help to provide you assistance for each of those phases of the project. So SAP, it's probably an overload of knowledge and information, but we have found it very helpful, and we've kind of filtered out some of the stuff that we found more helpful than others that we can share with you as well. So that's the roadmap viewer. You can also go into actually building out your project plan once you've decided the scope of your implementation. And SAP will actually deliver a basic project plan for you that you can then build on to deliver your solution. So this is independent of the path that you've chosen. Should you choose the Brownfield approach, SAP has pretty good guidelines on the different steps that you have to go through. So now you're considering an upgrade. Again, I put that in quotation marks because you really are looking at a conversion of your system. So there is definitely data migration that happens behind the scenes to the new tables, and there's a whole bunch of checks that you can go through the process. So these checks are very well defined here, and you would need to follow these checks sequentially, and it's one of the learning lessons that we've had out of our implementations is you need to follow sequentially the steps that SAP advises. When you try and skip steps in the process, you end up finding that you've got to come back and readdress those steps. So if we quickly try and summarize what a brownfield implementation would look like, I kind of borrowed this chart from SAP to talk about how your landscape would look at it. It would differ a little bit from client to client. So as you talk to your SI, you would probably come up with a slightly different plan. But we kind of agreed with SAP on this, that it really is very helpful that all of these steps that I'm kind of highlighting on the right-hand side, which was included on the slide before, need to be performed, and preferably in a sandbox to start off with. So we are quite often recommending to our customers to do a kind of a POC, a proof of concept, by copying their production environment into a sandbox somewhere. And that might be on the cloud, Azure, AWS, Google, or wherever you prefer, or even into your own data center if you have the space for it. But it's really advisable because you can actually run this entire process through the sandbox and see all the implications of running these different steps. Now remember, you've done the readiness check, so you really have a feel for what these things would be, but yeah, you would actually be in the system, and you would actually be able to make the changes you have to make to custom code and so on to move to the next step. And only once you are happy with this, and I'll talk on the next slide a bit about what you can get out of doing the sandbox, but it will then prepare you to go into the development environment. And once you get into the development environment, remember, you're basically freezing any future production support through the three landscapes, because you cannot actually do transports from the S4HANA system backward into an ECC environment. So once you make that leap into your dev, queue, and production environments, you want to move this process pretty smoothly. So the sandbox will get you prepared for that. And so your next step would be to run all of these steps in dev. If you like, you can do a copy of your production data to QA just to get a better feel for what production's really going to be like, again, because you've done it in the sandbox. But to do it in the queue environment, this step 6 is optional, but you could do that. And then you run only the steps that are now necessary in the queue environment. The steps that some of the delta steps that you need to do in dev are no longer necessary in queue or in production. So you would transport any changes from dev to queue, and then you would move to production and transport any changes from queue to production. So this is kind of the landscape overview of what you would need to do this in-place conversion of your system. So why Sandbox for the system conversion, you may ask? And I've kind of alluded to some of the reasons why you would do this. I think firstly is to practice and capture learnings of the steps involved. Now you could say, well, you're the SI, you've done a bunch of these conversions already or these upgrades already. Can't we just leverage the lessons you've learned? And I am going to share some of those with you. And for sure you can learn from other people that have done this. but ultimately everybody's system is unique, and there are going to be unique lessons to your system, to your data quality, to your custom developments that you may not pick up from other people. I will add at this point, though, that, and I'll mention this at the end as well, is that Illumity is part of a global partnership with other SAP system integrators across the globe, and it's called the United VARs. And all of these partners have actually been doing their upgrades in their countries, and we've been sharing lessons learned from them as well. So the more they do, the more lessons we will be able to bring to the table as a global partnership to help people avoid making mistakes that other people do. And that's the best scenario that you would like to get to. So practice and capture learnings are the steps involved. Estimate time taken for the different steps, because again, that will be unique to your system. Build an effort estimate or matrix for the resources required. So you're going to need basis, functional, and developmental resources. Hopefully most of the functional is around just regression testing and any activation of new functionality or new scope that you want to bring into your upgrade. And then create a detailed project plan. And the one thing I emphasize again here is that remember that once you move into the development system conversion, that you have to freeze your customer code and your customer support unless you have a workaround of doing that directly in QA and production in the interim. And then build a project task to categorize any data inconsistencies. So you might find that there are data inconsistencies. There's probably some poor data that needs to be migrated, but it needs to be managed. That will have to be something that you would want to document through this process. So that's, the basic preparations and understanding of what the system conversion would be, just from a technical upgrade perspective and how the landscapes and everything would work. The next question is, well, I kind of highlighted in yellow here, is the opportunity to do a gradual transition to SAP S4HANA. Now, I noticed from the poll that there's a big percentage of people that want to do the full-blown upgrade to S4HANA and leverage as much functionality as possible, and I greatly support that idea. But there is still a quarter of the population that are saying, we want to be able to do this as gradually as possible. Let's get to S4 quickly. We know that these upgrades are going to start becoming more plentiful and people are going to be busy, and eventually there's not going to be a lot of bandwidth for me to get this done. So let me get this done, but give me minimal impact to my business to start off with. And then afterwards, let's work out a roadmap that can help us leverage some of these capabilities at a later stage. So what is a gradual transition? Is it even possible? Lots of question marks around it. All right, so what are the benefits? So we have to come back to asking, and I'm sure you've asked this a million times, what are the benefits of SAP S4HANA? And you've probably looked at each of the lines of business in your organization. You've probably even looked at the industry you're in, and you've looked at all of the SAP materials around what am I going to get out of this? How do I sell an upgrade or a migration to S4HANA to my business? So you've probably done some of that due diligence already. But some of the things that I kind of bucketed the major benefits of moving to S4 into three major buckets. One is, of course, the simpler data model, and we can go into all the great things that come with that. Things like analytics directly out of your operational system. No need for BW for operational reporting, at least. The ability to write simplified custom code instead of having to join multiple tables like we had to do in the past. A bunch of those things that come with this simpler data model. But then also the improved user experience, so the whole Fiori evolution, which kind of ran in parallel actually with S4. It wasn't a result of S4 initially, but it's been completely embraced in the new S4 solution. And SAP has now focused on even building out applications that that make that user experience brilliant, but only work on an S4 environment. So there's a ton of improved user experience that comes together with the S4 implementation. So that's, again, a huge benefit of S4HANA. And if you combine the two together, SAP has combined the two together to build business processes that they never thought they could do before, because they have a simpler data model and they've got this really brilliant user interface that can interact with the system. And so they've now been leveraging new business processes, even like things like simplified workflow environments or workflow engines that the end user can leverage to manage workflows in the system, stuff that we couldn't do before because of the complexity of the database. So all of these are the three main categories of improvements that come with S4. So if I'm upgrading to S4, isn't it just by default I'd want to leverage all of this as I build my business case to my business to say, look, you know, we can actually leverage all of these great improvements directly out of the box. The problem with these things that you want to use is that they're not as straightforward as you would like to believe. And I'm not going to underplay them because I think they are amazing and they will make a huge difference to your organization. But let's look at some of the things that we need to consider as we do our migration. So the first thing is the simplified table structures. You can't avoid that. When you do your migration to S4HANA, all of the new ACT.A, MAT.A, all of the new tables that SAP has implemented in S4HANA are going to be there, and all of your data is going to be migrated into those tables. That's unavoidable. That's part of the upgrade process. But the user experience and all of these new business processes that come with S4HANA, I've kind of labeled as SAP Fiori. It's a little bit broad, but I kind of took the liberty of just let's focus on these applications that are embedded in the Fiori user experience and see how this affects us as we move forward. So what I wanted to look at here was some of the disruptions that this, if we decided we want to go full out 100%, leverage all of the new functionality, what are some of the disruptions that we can experience? There's a really, really good blog that I've put the link to on the presentation that you guys can click on afterwards, which goes through some of the 10 myths around and misconceptions to avoid around Fiori. Really, really well written and with a lot of interesting links and things that you can go and explore. But I'm going to focus on things that would specifically disrupt the upgrade as we go along. So I highlighted just 3 of these 10 in my overview today. And the first one is, this is kind of a myth, where everybody says, well, just do a technical upgrade to S4HANA. You don't have to use SAP Fiori. Use the old GUI forever, and everything will be good. You'll be on the new code base, but you'll just be using the GUI as before. So the answer is, it's not really a myth, because this is actually technically true. For the most part, 95%, maybe even 98%, you can get by without using Fiori at all when you do your technical upgrade. And sadly, some of our customers that have upgraded have ended up being in this situation at least for a couple of months before they moved on. And I say sadly because they really weren't getting to leverage some of the business value that they could have got out of the system from the beginning. And also, a lot of the business users, went through this process of regression testing on this upgraded, cool environment, and then discovered no cool benefits out of it. And that caused a little bit of a lot of concern from the business perspective. But the thing is, you can actually get there. You can actually say to the users, listen, we just need to get this technically upgraded. We'll leverage some of the cool stuff later, and let's move into SAP Fiori. Now, I did say 95 to 98% true, because there are some Fiori, some transactions that SAP has completely eliminated out of ECC, like bank account management and others, where you have to use the Fiori front end to be able to manage those things. But all in all, for the most part, your end users could actually leverage SAP S4HANA without going down the Fiori path. So trying to keep disruption to the minimum, If you do decide that you want to go the Fiori path, but only bring in small amounts of it, you have to start thinking about what that implication would, what the implications of that would be as well. So you can replace some of your transactions with SAP Fiori up to 100% for your everyday casual users, and maybe only 10% of your transactions would become real Fiori for a big bulk of your users. That's something that you would have to manage through change, right? You would want to bring your users eventually into a unified user experience. So you don't want users to use some Fiori applications in a Fiori Launchpad and other GUI transactions in a GUI interface. You really want one interface for everything. And again, SAP has the tools for you to be able to do that, even if you're only using 10% of the new Fiori apps, and 90% of the stuff you do is GUI transactions. You can use the business client or even the Fiori Launchpad to actually create one user experience. So that's something you would need to consider as you go through this process as well. And then finally, if you really want to embrace a lot of the Fiori stuff, the exception-based management, the analytics that we're going to talk about in the next webinar, is definitely something you would want to be embracing right from the beginning. So, and this is something that has to be managed, right? To teach people how to use exception-based management as opposed to Excel downloads and pivot tables is quite a task. So, to minimize disruption, you can start with the bare minimum of SAP Fiori and then choose organizational units to roll out Fiori, remembering some of the tips that I've given above as you do that. The second myth I wanted to talk about is that some people think that once you upgrade to S4HANA, all of Fiori is now active and ready to use, and that if you do have to activate anything, it's just a technical task that you have to go through. That is not true. There are a lot of decisions that you have to make when you move forward with Fiori. Like, you need to know what Fiori applications you actually want to activate, because some, if you just choose to activate everything, some are going to give you errors that you then have to address, and then maybe you don't even want to use them, but you're not going to be able to distinguish which errors you have to address and which errors you don't have to address. So there are a lot of decisions that you need to make about how much Fiori you want to use and how much Fiori you want to activate. And this is all based on what the business users require. So again, you can gradually transition into this, but you do have to think about how you're going to manage this gradual transition in terms of which business areas need this most and which apps are applicable to those business areas out of the gate. And in most cases, it's going to be a technical activation, but in many cases, an application will not work until you've done some configuration on the functional side as well. So be aware of that in the process. And then the third myth that I kind of wanted to debunk a little bit is, not assuming that user experience is a major part of your S4HANA implementation. So assuming that it's just a minor or technical part of your implementation would not be a good consideration to have as you go into your migration. So yes, you can go technically upgrade with minimum Fiori to start off with, but as you build your roadmap to roll more and more functionality out, you do have to have a UX lead of some sort to manage the process of all of these new applications. The people component is huge in SAP S4HANA. In the old days when SAP rolled out R3, or R2, R3, and eventually ECC, the GUI was the GUI. Your user experience was pretty limited to whatever SAP provided out of the box. Since then, SAP has completely revamped its user experience, engaging the end users far more in building out the solution, and this is what SAP S4HANA brings to the table. So the people component is huge. You cannot eliminate the people component as you're doing your upgrade. So you need a good project plan in place, involving the people that you need in that project plan, like a good UX lead, a good UX strategy, and make sure that everything is technically activated the way that you need to have it activated. All right, so moving along, the last aspect of the system conversion that I think you need to even think about, whether it's greenfield or brownfield. Greenfield would be your new implementation, or your brownfield system conversion implementation is your data. So in some cases, some of our mid-market customers have really limited data, and they've been pretty good about looking after their data since they implemented SAP. So they don't really go through too much pain during the migration to S4HANA. But it is something that you need to review as an organization. So firstly, data validation. What data is good and needs to go to S4? What data is good but not needed in S4? What data is poor but has to go to S4, and what data is poor that you can actually just eliminate because it's not needed. And so you need to go through that validation, and then you need to go through some data archiving methodology in terms of what data do I need all the time, what data do I only need some of the time, and what data do I not need at all. And those are the hot, warm, and cold categories you typically hear about. So we have a bunch of partners that we work with depending on the data needs of our customers. Like DataVard or WindShuttle, that kind of help a little bit in understanding how we can do better data validation and archiving in customers that have huge volumes of data. So don't forget about that in your process. So Steve, just quickly one more poll before we start getting to wrapping up. If you could just manage this one for me as well, I would appreciate it. Thank you.
Absolutely. Here's our second and final poll question. So we'd like to know, which path have you chosen for moving to SAP S4HANA? Is it a new implementation, greenfield, adopting SAP best practices where applicable? Perhaps it's system conversion, brownfield, keeping your current configuration and making only necessary changes. Landscape transformation, merging multiple systems into one SAP S4HANA system. Or landscape transformation, keeping source systems but integrating into a central finance system. Another option is maybe you haven't chosen a path as yet. So thanks for responding to this and our other poll question, and we're going to reveal the results in just a few moments. I want to make sure we get a lot of feedback here.
Good, thank you, Steve. I look forward to seeing where people are. We've kind of polled our own install base to see what they think, and it would be interesting to see how the rest of you guys compare with our own customers.
Absolutely.
You ready to move on, Steve?
Yeah, let's take a look.
Okay, let me see. Okay, great. So we have, let me have a look. So 40% still haven't chosen a path yet, which is perfectly understandable because there's lots of things to consider as you make these choices, as we've discussed previously. But there's also another 40% saying that they want to keep their current system and do a brownfield upgrade. And in fact, that's what I've been finding amongst our install base as well, is that a lot of people are pretty comfortable with their current SAP environment and want to just move forward with that environment, start leveraging some of the S4 functionality. And 13% are saying, well, you know what? This is a perfect opportunity for us to start leveraging best practices. We've got a lot of old stuff in our system that have cluttered our system over a while that we probably won't benefit from carrying forward. And again, obviously there's a lot of configuration you can reconfigure in the new environment if you want to take some of that forward, but it does make a lot of sense. So this is kind of what I've been seeing amongst our own install base as well. So thanks very much for that, Steve. So for the last few minutes before we get into Q&A, I wanted to just go through a couple of slides to talk about some lessons that we've learned along the way. So some lessons just upgrading to S4HANA from ECC. We're actually also about to start an upgrade from a simple finance S4HANA implementation to 1709, and I think it's going to come with a whole bunch of additional lessons learned. But the ones that I'm sharing with today are really starting from an ECC environment. And we'll answer some questions at the end about, well, what do you do if you're not even on ECC, if you're still on R3? We can talk about that at the end during the Q&A. But just some of the lessons that we've learned along the way. So SAP has provided a lot of documentation, and like I said, it might become a little overwhelming when you go through things like the roadmap viewer and start seeing all the things that SAP provides. But it's really worth the effort to go through some of those things, and even to talk to a system integrator like Illumity about which of those things are really worthwhile looking at. Not to say that any of the SAP information is not worthwhile. Of course, it's all worthwhile, but there's some of it that may be a little bit more pertinent to the situation that you're in. And we can kind of provide guidance for that. But one of the things we did find is it's very important to review the guides ahead of time. Don't try and go through them step by step as you read through them, because sometimes you find yourself in a situation that you've got to backtrack because you skipped a step that you shouldn't have. So you need to follow it step by step, and also be aware of any kind of OSS notes that need to be applied. The SAP S4HANA support portal actually gives you a list of all the notes that need to be applied for the different areas, and the SAP Readiness Check actually guides you through those OSS notes as well. So you need to be aware of those as you go through the process. And one of the things that we also found is when we set up the dev system, when we got to that point in the system conversion process, that it actually helps to get rid of redundant clients in that environment. So if you have a bunch of clients that you just set up initially because you wanted a bunch of sandboxes for whatever reason, the problem is if you do an upgrade on all of those clients, if one of them gets stuck, your whole conversion process gets stuck and you can't move forward. And in our world, in our very first implementation, we had to actually undo everything, delete some of the superfluous clients, and then do the upgrade, because we weren't willing to put in all the effort on a client that we weren't interested in keeping anyway. So just be aware of that as you do this. The other lessons were on the system build and security side, so some big lessons here. One thing is, of course, make sure that your systems can support the conversion processes. So this is on the system build side. Make sure you've got the resources from a system perspective to do the conversion process, because you need extra room during the conversion, not after the conversion, because we know that the database can be simplified and made smaller. But during the conversion process, you actually need extra room on your systems to be able to go through that process. So we had to even add extra CPU on some of our smaller clients in order to speed up the whole process in that case. So just be aware of that. And also make sure that you have the right version of Solution Manager to support the process. And SAP will give you all of those recommendations in the documentation that you apply. And then the most important to me has been the security roles and the launch pad that you want to roll out. So if you do plan to do a full-blown conversion, be sure to have your user roles, your users and their roles set up ahead of time, because SAP best practices is great, but you will find as you go through SAP best practices that there will be Fiori applications and even processes within the best practices that aren't relevant to your business. And so it becomes redundant or overkill in some cases, and you need to simplify the SAP best practices to your company's best practices. And so we've actually, as an organization, have gone through a very tedious process of doing that and eliminating, like there are some Fiori applications, and I hate to say this if there are SAP people listening, because there are some Fiori applications that we just thought weren't ready for our lines of business and for our industries. And so we tested them out, and we found, we would have to do so many enhancements on them, which we will do eventually, but right out of the gate, we're probably going to just stick with the GUI in a Fiori tile using the Belize theme for the moment. Maybe we'd even apply SAP screen personas to those screens to simplify them a little and wait for the Fiori app to evolve a little bit. But there are some of those kind of decisions that we made, and we built out all of our security roles based on that, and that's what we are now leveraging as we roll out our implementations with our customers. So something for you to think about, and we can chat about that also afterwards or at another time as you please. I've got to move on here, and I'm not giving much time for questions and answers. So just very quickly, preparing for go live and support. You've just got to be careful that you have the right users assigned, and also that you have the reconciliation reports before and after in place and running. And then finally, just any kind of change management processes that you need to consider. Make sure that you have documented those business processes that will change, and that you manage the business lines of business that have to deal with those changes through the process. And any kind of reporting variants and things that you've saved beforehand in ECC may not be applicable afterwards. Be aware of those. The Sandbox actually helps identify a lot of that, and be ready to have those available when you go live. So, walk before you run the SAP Readiness Check, choose your path as soon as you possibly can, build your roadmap to a gradual transition, deciding on how much Fiori you want and when, make sure your data decisions are made and that you're ready to handle that, and then learn from everybody else's mistakes and successes rather than your own where you can. And that means leverage your system integrator. And like I said, Illumity has the broader United VARs partnership that also helps us bring some lessons learned to the table. So that's the end of what I wanted to share. I think we need to hop over to Q&A very quickly. We've got a few minutes to do some of those. And I just wanted to mention that I have a white paper out there that we will be sending out to all of the participants for this that goes into all of the different options and paths to S4HANA in a little bit more detail. So I'll hand over to whoever's going to administrate the question and answers right now.
Okay, great, Lorraine. Excellent. Thank you very much. As Lorraine mentioned, a white paper, a PDF of a white paper, and the slides are available in the audience console for download, so you can check those out. Also want to push out a link to register for our upcoming event next month, September 26th, so you can check that out, and hope you can participate in that. And meanwhile, also want to remind you to please fill out the feedback form that is on your desktop. We do have time for maybe a question or two here. Let's get to Christine's. Is there a way to migrate all the development of existing interfaces with SAP ECC, inbound, outbound, EDI, etc., when choosing a greenfield implementation to S4HANA?
All right, so that's actually a very good question. It is something that we've been looking at. One of the things that SAP does, even in a greenfield, is there are still views that exist on the views that exist that reference the old data structures, but that point to the new data structures in the system. So in some instances, we've been able to leverage some of those integrations by just applying the fact that those views still exist within the S4HANA environment. So I would say that it is possible, but we'd probably have to sit down with you to look at what are the integrations that you have, because I'm not sure, and in some of the examples that we've been through, that can be applied across the board. But that is something we would have to probably do on a case-by-case basis.
Okay, great. And Violet has one last question here. What is the best way to get up to speed on all of the Fiori apps available to determine whether they would be right for our business operations?
Okay, so there is a link in my presentation to those 10 myths on Fiori. I suggest very strongly that you go in there. Within that link, there are multiple links, but one of them is to a lighthouse kind of discussion on Fiori applications that are most beneficial to businesses as businesses move forward across all of the lines of business. And there's a nice description in that lighthouse presentation on each of these apps and what the benefits are. The other option, of course, is to go to the Fiori library itself and then just look at the real Fiori application. So you need to look at UI5 applications, not the GUI transactions that are in that library, and then focus on, by your line of business that you're exploring, the applications that are available from that perspective. But I really strongly suggest you go to the blog, and there's a lot of good links there that will help you familiarize yourself with the Fiori apps that are out there.
Okay, thanks very much. Unfortunately, that is all the time we have for this session. So if we didn't get to your question during our live broadcast, someone will follow up with you over the next few business days. And for more information, you can see the contact information here before you. We want to thank you all for attending today's webinar, Walk Before You Run, the easy way to move to SAP S4HANA, hosted by SAP Insider and sponsored by Illumity. Shortly after this live event, we'll send you an email reminder to access this presentation on demand. And on behalf of our guests, Lorraine Howell, Vice President, Research and Development with Illumity, we want to thank you for your time and have a great day.